Welcome everybody. If you've joined us yet, maybe there might be some more that trickle in. But we have am I still echoing, Anissa? Sounds like I'm echoing.
No, I actually don't hear an echo.
Okay, good. Well then, we are privileged to have Barbara Bester, who founded Bester Architecture in Los Angeles, California, joining us today for what is the second installment of our series titled Beginnings, where we are seeking out small architecture firms around the country whose work we admire and think that they have something that they could share to our small firm constituents here in Austin and beyond. And so we are very pleased to have her join us today. I'm going to quickly thank our sponsors for the Small Firms Roundtable for 2021. They are Mend Services, Syntex Sash and Door, and Knight Construction. And if any representative from any one of those companies is joining us today, thank you so much for your financial support, and it's helped us tremendously through what is already one half of 2021. So forever indebted to you for supporting this AIA Austin committee. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Magic.
Thanks, Sean. It's a great pleasure this morning to have Barbara Bester, FAIA, joining us today to continue our discussion on beginnings. This idea about how practices started and kind of the road and map that went from there. So if you don't know Barbara and her work, you should go look at it. It's incredible. Her body of work started in the 90s and includes such beautiful, well-known places all throughout America, but especially in her little home pad of Silver Lake in Los Angeles. There she has her house. Even wrote a book called Bohemian Modern that is just a great little pamphlet. And it's also amazing to see someone who is creative, but it works at all kinds of different scales, whether it's commercial, corporate interiors, coffee shops, and then very amazing homes, and even has done restoration on two beautiful Lautner houses. And with that, it's a pleasure to have you, Barbara. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm a big Austin fan. I've been there several times. Love it. As I was telling these guys before everybody else joined, it just seems like everybody I know is leaving LA in search of a better life is going to Austin, which I'm sure you guys are annoyed by, but we hear about it all the time. But I also have an Austin native in my office, and it just seems, I don't know, we're always looking at what's going on there as a kind of seems like you guys have a really wonderful aesthetic about how to live, life informally. And I think that's something that I'm really into. I'm not the McMansion lady, I'm trying to keep it simple and organic and stuff. So it's cool.
Awesome. Well, to kind of start this off, how did you start Bester Architecture?
Let's see. I went to grad school at SciArc in the late 80s, graduated in the early 90s. And I had interned a lot. I worked at Morphosis for a summer before I went to grad school. And I had worked a lot for this friend of mine who's an architect. But after school, I took a brief. I was like, I should work in a bigger office. I tried to get a job at Frank Gehry's, but they weren't hiring. I got a job at a big kind of corporate firm that had just done for a tower, a relatively nice tower in LA. Actually, someone originally from Texas. It was Keating, Mann, Jernigan, Rote or something. They no longer exist, but it was. And I was like, that'll be interesting. I'll learn all this stuff. And I went there. I was like, oh my god, this is a nightmare. It was so corporate, and it was really run by a group of frat boys, I thought, and it was really boring. We're redoing elevator cores. I was like, oh my god, I don't think I can do this. And then I started getting all these weird little side jobs because I always had a social life that wasn't necessarily all architecture centric, which is my number one recommendation. If you want to start your own firm, you got to get a bunch of non-architect people to hang out with. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed for getting projects. But Anyway, so I started getting all these little projects, like I actually was like writers' offices. A lot of people in LA are like screenwriters, TV writers, musicians, and I would be doing all these, like I'd design all the furniture. I would make like the whole sort of, I was into Pierre Chareau at the time. So I was like just the whole deal, kind of a modern built-in thing. And then this friends of friends wanted to, who were also like, they were TV writers. One of them worked on The Simpsons. One worked, they had like a little house in Sioux House, and they wanted to knock it down and build a new house. And they asked, like, they wanted to interview me, and I strategically went in with my friend Norman Millar, who I had worked for a bunch during school, who's a really nice kind of one-man office, who also taught, but had actually built like maybe 4 or 5 buildings up in Seattle and like some remodels here. So he knew what he was doing. I was like, let's go in. Like, do you want to go in on this with me? And like, I think we can probably get it, and we could have like a joint venture. And he was like, sure. And we went in, we got the job. So we got to do this new house. So that was maybe around 93 or something like that, 94. So that kind of started a real practice in a way. And we shared an office, but we didn't become official partners, because we got a couple more things together, but he had his own little things. I had my own little things. And we did that for several years. We shared all the overhead. We shared staff. Our staff was like one guy. It wasn't staff, but our rent was minimal. But it was really fun. And I was teaching. So I started teaching probably, embarrassingly, probably like a year after school. I've always had academic side. So I was teaching at UCLA, grad school studio. And then I taught at SCI-Arc for like 5 or 6 years. And so I had that kind of practice / 1 or 2 projects type of deal. Mm-hmm. Then I got my license kind of quickly, because I was like, if I don't do this now, I never will.
Right. And
then I got a couple more bigger, like more houses on my own, and decided to kind of get my own space. And I had like a 3 staff for maybe 5 years or something like that. I started to do a bunch of things. I did some retail spaces. Like my ex-husband had a clothing company called X Large. I did stores for them, and did a bunch of stores in Japan where you literally would design the store. This is pre-digital drawings, by the way. It's like, drawings, and then we would make a really detailed model in a shoebox and send it to Japan. Because in Japan, the architecture business, the contractors are also doing the drawings and the permitting. So you just had to give them the design, and then they would do everything else. And you don't really have any control over it. It was like a minimal fee, but it was kind of entertaining, because in the future, I got to go to Japan. Like, oh, I did that store. And I designed this shoebox model, and now here's our store.
How was the translation? Like, did it translate? Did they do a good job?
It was pretty good, yeah. But like, no one's calling me to like ask for, which is this the right image that you wanted in the horizontal strip of images? They just did it. So I have no idea how, but it was fascinating. But yeah, so I sort of a mixture of things, and then and I kind of kept that. That's sort of how it started, really. And it wasn't until maybe like several years in where I started to get I got like 1 or 2 new houses, very low budget, like I think $200,000, $250,000 budget houses. I did 2 of those around the end of the 90s. And I was doing a lot of work. Part of X Large was the Beastie Boys. I did a recording studio for them. I did offices. I did a theater for somebody, like an adaptive use. It was really all through the social friend network that I had in LA, like kind of 90s LA Silver Lake scene, very music oriented. And
when did you, or how did you end up doing the Intelligentsia in Silver Lake?
Well, that was down the road. So that was, let's see, I forgot. I think that was like 12 years ago. So so somewhere in there, I did this little short TED Talk, which explains everything in between there, where I got divorced and I had this freak out, and I almost went to art school, and then I built this house for myself, and then that got in the New York Times, and I got a book deal, and suddenly I got a name bigger than just Silver Lake. So I can't overemphasize the value of press. If you're trying to start something, like you get one good press thing, then people start calling you to ask, like, do you have anything they can publish? It's harder when you're like, can you publish my project? It's harder, but the other big thing for that is having really good photographs of your projects that are the kind of photographs that you might see in a magazine, as opposed to photographs that you took on your iPhone.
Right.
And yeah, so just press, you really need to be decent at outreach if you want to keep it rolling, because that's how you broaden beyond the network of just people you know randomly through your networks. Yeah. But then, so later on I was divorced, and I had done some retail, but that actually, so the intelligentsia really happened. It was not meritocratic at all. It was like the crazy guy who was the landlord of this big complex in Silver Lake, who is still crazy and kind of like a frenemy of mine, but he runs this really successful restaurant over there. But he wanted to really design, and like, so Doug Zell, who is how I know you guys, who's a great like founder, entrepreneur, started like one of the main third wave coffee things. They had a couple stores in Chicago, but they wanted to do a flagship in LA. And I essentially was kind of like shotgun wedding married to him through this landlord who's like, if you want to do something good, you should use Barbara because she's our neighborhood person and she's cool and she'll do something cool. And I had done a lot of retail and restaurant stuff, but I had as a neighborhood person, I was also really intent on doing something that resisted what was the current trend at that point. Was still like, I call it the pinkberry problem. I don't know if you have those there, but it was like, there had been like this big thing where like there was a zillion suddenly these pinkberry frozen yogurt things. Everything's like bright pink and like has just kind of very garish, futuristic branding and like very strong, but very just a whole different thing, and effective, I think, as brand making, but not effective in like a neighborhood that was really anti-gentrification and kind of a little more humble, but like interesting. There was like a couple of like rubber bonded stores across the street, and like a 500-year-old Army Navy down the road. Like you didn't want to like mess with. I mean, as a resident, I didn't want to mess with this neighborhood in some kind of like shock in the new way. So I was interested in trying to figure out how to do something that was could give the illusion that it had maybe always been there, but was also cool. So like that's kind of how that intelligentsia idea came along. And I had been to Istanbul recently and had just gotten into tile patterns. And so I found this guy in the neighborhood from Nicaragua who imported this Nicaraguan cement tile, and I kind of made a deal with him and we got all this tile. And like, so I do think that the massive wave of pattern concrete tile some of that can be put at my feet, whether you like it or hate it, I guess.
Definitely.
But that was but it was kind of fun, and it worked out really well. And it did become like a little bit of a neighborhood, like third place. Like people really hang out there a lot. I don't even go there if I don't have a good outfit on because it's like too chic, But if I have a good outfit, I might go to Intelligentsia sometimes. Otherwise, I go to like Dunkin' Donuts or something. But don't tell Doug that.
I won't. No, speaking of Dunkin' Donuts, you're from Massachusetts originally, correct?
Yes, I am a masshole, as they say. Yes.
And what brought you west? Was it school or?
Yeah, well, it was. Let's see. As an undergrad, I was an art major, but I knew I was going to be an architect from like 12 or 13. But I come from a very academic family, so I knew I was going to go to grad school. So I wanted to get a liberal arts undergrad and then do architecture grad school. But while I was an undergrad, I couldn't take it. I didn't have any architecture classes and stuff. So I ended up going for a year to the AA in London. And that would have been like 85, 86. And the AA at the time, this is like one time, like during the time I was there, the big architecture magazine in Britain was Architecture Review. And on the cover was Frank Gehry's Nelson House, which is the kind of cool one on the boardwalk in Venice that has like a writer's room that looks like one of the old lifeguard stations and stuff. And I was like, this stuff is so cool. And then the guys that work there, actually Alvin Boyarsky, who ran the school, he's like, you should stay here if you're gonna be an architect, but if you're gonna go anywhere in the US, do not go back to the East Coast. Don't do it. Go to grad school, go to SCI-Arc, basically. Go to LA. That's the only place in America where you can build cool stuff, basically. Which was kind of true. Having grown up in Cambridge, all the architects I knew, and I was like, oh, I'm an architect. Like, I really liked the stuff in Tokyo at the time. Like, I was obsessed with Japanese avant-garde architecture at the time, but everything in Boston and Cambridge was always covered in red brick. It was mostly institutional. It was like super Yansville, and then the schools were very theory oriented, which I liked, but I was like, then I really can only be a professor if I do that. So I was like, let me check this out. So I went out to LA. I got an internship at Morpheus that summer, and I loved it. It was crazy, but I loved it. And then I was like, all right, after I graduate from college, I'm gonna go back out there. So then I did, and I went to SCIARC, and SCIARC had like, I don't know, like 200 people in it. It cost like $4,000 a semester. It was really cheap. It was amazing. I was there for 3.5 years. And then ultimately I became a professor there. But yeah, so that was, and it was true, frankly. It was a good place. I'm sure like Austin, frankly, like a good place to start a practice ultimately, because you had enough people interested in just not the idea of architecture. And frankly, when I got out of school, like bougie people, the kind of people that would commission a house were all obsessed with Mediterranean at the time. Like that was what all the cool Hollywood people had, like old Hollywood mansions, and like, so you could buy, like people were, if you only architects like, you know, Neutra and like mid-century, so all that stuff was like $1, but nobody was really getting it. Now it's like the reverse, you know, like any fancy music executive, like I have a Neutra, I have a whatever, like very name droppy, but it was really different in the 90s. But there was still just all this cool stuff getting built, a lot of postmodern fun stuff, you know, neat restaurant design. And it's a city, you know, of images. So it is a, you know, there's people are like, want to express themselves in multiple forms, you know. So it's been good. And it has been very, very good to me.
I mean, speaking of that, like your work seems to be very graphic and colorful, and you tend to like pull different elements of brand into your spaces. Like, is that from your art background, or where do you draw that inspiration from?
Well, I do think that architecture, and I consider it, I put the blame at the feet of neoliberal capitalism and where we are now, where like it just kind of made people get more and more specialized and more technical. Whereas like in the beginning, like, you know, you kind of do the whole show from like the silverware to the, you know, roof chimney detail or something. So I try to take back the ground, you know, whenever I have an opportunity. And frankly, doing retail and restaurants was a good place to really, you can do a lot more expressive stuff than you would in residential in that space. And that actually led us to get some pretty big, I mean, we have a pretty big business in large size TI work. You know, we do headquarters, we've done Nike's LA headquarters, we did Snapchat's headquarters, we did Arab's headquarters, like we do some big TIs. It's a good economic back burner, you know? And you know, one of the great things about color and graphics and vinyl and paint is that it costs a hell of a lot less than, you know, solid wood or marble or gold or whatever. So, and it's kind of, I am very interested in like the high-low, like that's something I probably got out of SCIARC originally, and just the idea that like, that popular culture is a really great source of inspiration, also just to connect to people with where they are. You know, I mean, I love like Zumthor, but I'm not that guy, you know, in terms of kind of such a singular thing. But I feel like you can get that idea of atmosphere that like even the Zumthor talks about, and the kind of visceral reaction to something. You can do it out of inexpensive things as well, which I think a lot of art culture shows us, you know, like a lot of, even just video art right now is like so amazing, like what it can do to your mind just looking at a screen for it. So I feel like kind of embracing the multiple tools that we have. I'm not that interested in brand per se, like I can do it, but like in general, it's more like if it's a fabulous chef and they really care about their thing, and like then we'll work on like the logo and the whole thing. But I try not to do brand at like the corporate level because it's not really my bag.
When you mention high-low, is that high impact, low cost? Is that what you're?
No, like high culture, low culture, like
high culture, low culture.
Okay. Mozart and Mumford, you know, like just kind of like it does. I think that's more, and that's you know, LA is a lot like that because you've got the music business. Like you could be like Yo-Yo Ma jamming with Flea from the Chili Peppers, like that actually happens. You know, like it's kind of that's what I'm interested in. And theoretically, I mean, from a belief system, I like our logo for the office is that everyone should experience strange beauty every day. And that's this kind of dedication to the idea that like everyday life is really where like whether you're walking down the street to Intelligentsia, whatever your outfit is, or like that you can, like, these things can like visually or sensorially, affect your day in a good way. I mean, like leaving the world a better place
Right.
than what we found it for those things.
I guess I have a question about, maybe related to kind of your interest in Japanese architecture, because that tends to be really, stark, muted, sort of empty. I mean, at least I guess
You're talking about Ando. That's old school. I'm talking about
Well-
the next wave. No,
Well, you were
Ando's
saying-
like
you were
one
saying-
thing, but like I'm talking about like
Shinohara.
Fujimura, like crazy. Like it's and it was like that in the
Yeah.
80s. Like there's just
Sure.
an amazing, on like a parcel of land that's like what, like 10 feet by 30 feet. You just get these amazing projects. I mean, it's been going on since I think the 70s. It's just totally different than American architecture. Like I
Sure.
guess the value of the land is so high. I mean, we're getting there, I guess, in Austin and LA, but that the cost of the building, no matter how bananas it is, doesn't really matter because it's the land that is so valuable. But there's something about that culture too that is people will kind of be like willing to build, a house with like one window, like some, there's probably like an air conditioned unit in the back somewhere, but it can be very expressive and individualistic and eccentric. I like the eccentricity.
This is maybe a tangent, but I admire Japanese architecture to a large degree as well, and just the craftsmanship that is inherent in most of what they do. And thinking about translating that to America and the level of craftsmanship, I understand it's probably very expensive to build a house in Tokyo, but it seems, I don't know, is it equally expensive to build a house in Austin that doesn't get the same attention to craftsmanship and materials? I'm just so curious about how they're doing it over there. I mean, are the houses I'm seeing like $14 million and $1,500 a square foot to actually build them? Did you get any sense of, I know you just kind of mailed your model in a shoebox, but do you have any?
Also the 90s.
Sure.
I think that the codes are very lenient. And so a lot of what we see that looks so exciting is built a little bit like a mobile, like there's no railings on the stair, there's no there's no insulation requirement. So I doubt the costs are like what you're talking about. I think that because the engineering and the building are done by the same people, I just think it's a different system. But I think like the guy that knows a fair amount about that is Botant Bogner, who's a professor at like Illinois Champaign-Urbana. He's written a bunch of books on Japanese. He's done a lot of interviews, and I think he teaches classes there. But if you wanted to know more, that would be a fun resource. And then I would like to know what you learned, because I'm always curious too. But I think I look at it more. What I like about it is more this, the individualism that we value as architects, and like Western architects in particular, and that kind of like, Frank Lloyd Wright or like, Gregory Ain or whatever, like just trying out stuff. You see a lot more of that going on somewhere like Tokyo right now than you do even here, even though we have some space for it, but we have a real estate market that's very specific, and they're like, well, where's the, primary bedroom suite? Like, it's just different. So there doesn't seem to be the pressure on normative resale values, and that's, I think, part of what makes it so interesting. I don't know why there isn't a pressure on normative resale values, but maybe it's because the land is the expensive thing. It doesn't really matter. I don't know.
Sure, that's a great point.
It's sort of two projects that come to mind are the Lautner houses that you worked on. His houses were always so unconventional, but also radical, based on that kind of high technology but low budget, especially his early work. What was it like to have to kind of almost restore something, but then navigate the California codes and idiosyncrasies of his work?
Well, like the two that I worked on most recently were the Salkin House, which is like super early from maybe 1942, and it probably cost like $1 to build it. Like it's almost a pavilion. It's very small. It's probably 1,200 square feet at the most. And that one was a restoration also in the sense that it had been owned by the same family, but there'd been like random, really crappy additions on it. It had been a rental. It had major flood issues. Like every year, it was next to a hill, and just water just going right through it and like wreck everything. And luckily, I had a concrete floor, but like a lot of the wood super damaged, and people had cut holes in it. And it had been a rental. I think no one even knew it was a Lautner. Like it was when it went for sale. There's a hilarious article about it on Curbed. That was about calling it the Lost Lautner, but it wasn't, because the same owner had commissioned Lautner to do a different house as well. The owner's name was Salkin. Nobody realized that there was actually two different Salkin houses, so it didn't make it into the archives at the Getty at first, and like all this stuff. And but it was so early that it was very influenced by like the Taliesin, like kind of like a low budget Taliesin project, where what was really interesting and innovative about it, and let's say if Lautner's biggest number one thing that makes his work so compelling is using structure as a form of expression, but it also kind of works. It's not like superfluous. So that one's built on these stents, these two big columns that support the whole roof, which is actually like a normal roof, but it reads like a flat roof because of the detailing and stuff. I know it is. So the roof is like this, but actually the interior reads like a butterfly roof. So it actually kind of like there's a section that comes out the point. So when you see the house, you just assume it's this really rad butterfly roof, but it's actually kind of normal-ish. I mean, aside from the stent, it works, pretty well. But there it was really going through the drawings, and those kind of jobs, we just do them as a time and materials process with the builders that we're working with to kind of figure out like how to patch the stained red concrete, which is the same thing that Wright always used. How do we we had to have custom building on all. There's a lot of like plywood and a piece of glass on it as window walls that are not to code. But what's nice in LA is that you can kind of do preservation stuff informally. Like we could kind of just, it was all just repair work, most of it. We weren't adding, we were just demolishing stuff. And so we just repaired and kind of, get like a permit for, rebuilding the kitchen or something like that, but kind of work it out with the historical resources people. The other one I worked on is like the opposite end of the spectrum. Like it was probably Lautner's most elaborate, one of the most elaborate projects, which was called Silvertop, and that started in 1958, but it really actually never finished. But it kind of went from 58 to 65, and it was abandoned. And then someone else moved in 72, and then they lived there for 40 years and didn't change anything, and put in like some Home Depot kitchen and stuff because that had never been finished. And my clients bought it, I don't know, 7 years ago or something, and then we had to kind of do a bazillion things of maintenance, but we got to build new kitchens, bathrooms, like stuff that had never been finished. And that was really fun. So we had access to all the archives at the Getty, but we also had this option where like the house had really been thought of by the owner, the original client, and the architect Lautner. Like they were best friends, and they had this whole idea about what's the house of the future. They tried to get like tax credits for building the whole house as a research project, and had a big fight with the IRS. It's a hilarious set of letters and stuff. But so we were like, well, what's the house of, like, what is stuff that you can do in the 21st century to kind of continue this while supporting the house functioning and working again, but also like adding mostly like invisible things that were like technologies from the 21st century, or like large format glass that you couldn't have, like we did this big curved glass and that you couldn't have done originally, but sort of pushing the technical boundaries. So that was pretty cool. Somebody made a short film about it for me that I haven't released yet, but it's really fun. Like we tried to do like a fun civilian oriented film about it just because it's such a cool house. So stay tuned.
Cool.
But yeah, so it's fun to be in dialogue with people like that. Like when I was a student, one of my favorite projects that I went to see in LA was, it's a Frank Lloyd Wright house of the textile block variety, but then it had been remodeled or added to, and like interiors by Schindler, like 20 years later. And then Lautner had like done all the windows another 10 years later. So it was like this total, like the Schindler stuff was like sort of like architectural kudzu, like little wood things stuck into the textile block receptacles to just, it was very accretional and dialogue between all these people, trialogue, whatever. And that was really exciting. And so like, that's how I try to see the lot, like that, at least the second Lautner, where there was space for us to be in dialogue. It wasn't pure restoration.
It's neat. That's really neat. Do you see like carryover between, like, some people practice as a residential architect, a lot of people practice as a commercial architect. How do you see, in your office, are people in one particular camp, or are they in both? Like, how do you manage the work?
My whole thing is, I just believe that the architects should be generalists, because that's what we're trained for, and that's what we like. Like, we think about culture and art and philosophy and people and technical things and structure, and I just don't like to have anyone siloed. I just think it's too, and maybe it's me, but I think it's just depressing to only get to do one thing. So often someone will be like the lead designer on a TI project, but they're also doing like SD on a house, or like CA on a house, as a kind of like relief from the grind of like Revit documents or whatever. And sometimes with like residential, at least it's a little more flexible. You can kind of go like, okay, well, we're gonna get to that part in a month, because we got to focus on this thing right now. So we try to use the workflow to also help make that work. And there's some people are probably better at like project management than others. Some people are more like just ready to design anything at the drop of a hat than others. And so we try to make sure they have a chance, the people can really work to their skill set, but are also not like abandoning all the other skills. Because you never know. I always feel like, world could fall in, and we're going to be doing like 3 kitchen remodels. Like, at least everybody should know how to do that if you have to, without being like, I can do that. Like last year was a big one. Luckily we weren't all in on commercial, because that would have been a disaster. We did like 20 houses last year and no commercial. But right before that, we just done like a $20 million Nike headquarters. So a bunch of people, so just sort of I think it's really good. If you're going to be a small office, you have to be very light on your feet and like kind of curious and open to stuff that it comes up. I think also taking like weird pro bono things that might actually lead to a project seems to always be a good idea, because even if it doesn't turn into a project, it kind of increases your network and your connectedness to the community in different ways. So we've been doing a lot of that kind of stuff as well.
How many people are you guys at currently?
21 architects and two, like one CFO. That's the other good thing. If we're talking about like not just design stuff, but like my office was fine, but luckily my best friend hadn't worked for a long time because her daughter had a lot of issues at birth, and so she had like 10 years off from her job, and she had been the COO of a toy company back in the day. She's like, what should I do? I want to get back into work. I was like, oh, why don't you come and like help me for a few months, so I could kind of use some help getting the business side of my thing going. And it just turned into like this. She was like this genius who actually cares about like spreadsheets and getting people to pay us on time and like all this stuff that I did not have any interest in doing and would rather not even think about. And like suddenly we became like incredibly profitable. Like, it's like, thank God. Just contracts, like, oh my God, like all of that. So, and she's like, you should only do things that you're really good at, which is like concept and schematic design and clients and like kind of quality control, and then we'll have other people do all the other things. So I was like, oh, because I was before like the one-man band with the tuba and the washboard and everything, and now I really try to do and other people have things that they're really good at and like doing.
How long had you been in practice before she joined you?
Oh, a long time.
Yeah.
Didn't make a dime. No, I was okay, but it was a different ballgame. So that's the thing. If you have someone who likes spreadsheets and money stuff and thinks it's a game to like get paid properly and, not go like, oh, I'm sorry, let me do that for free for the next 10 years or whatever, that's good, because like a little bit of a hard ass. I think she's been around for maybe 7 or 8 years. And that's certainly when we went from like 6 people to, 15 for a while, and then 25. And because honestly, there was no way to manage the projects without someone really looking at the finances and contracts. So it was just, I got a lot of opportunities, but just often wouldn't be able to pursue them if I didn't have time to do it.
Yeah, I was curious. I'm glad you said you were six. I was curious about how many, one man band, how many people you were trying to kind of keep in line. Did she also then help you? It sounds like she also was able to help you then kind of bring on more team members, help manage those team members through their design process, even though maybe she didn't. I mean, she sounds like a sharp woman, so I'm sure she was able to kind of pick up the process of an architectural project and be able to kind of manage people through that process.
But she doesn't manage the projects. There's other people in the architects thing manage all the process, but her point of view, which was unique to me, and then probably something you learned at business school, was like, we're able to make more money and bill more hours the more people that we have that are doing work.
Right.
Which is, like as an architect, you're kind of like, oh, what if this chicken little, like, what if the sky falls in? I don't want to hire anybody that, like, what if things stop, and so I was in a very small space for a long time, so I almost like was limited by the office size. I was like, oh, I can't really hire any more people, because I had like my office and I had an Airstream, like 4 people in it. I was like, and finally, just like, we gotta move. Like, this is dumb. Like, we should move so we have room. And then we moved once, and we kept expanding in there. And then we moved to the space now that is way bigger than what we need. So we have like a gallery and like all this stuff. And like, but we could be like 65 people if we needed to be. Not that I want to be, but we have enough room for that, So it's kind of like don't have to. That's less of a, like, just all those weird unconscious things that can kind of, I feel like a life coach, but can keep you from growing, because you just think like, oh, no, I'm in this kind of office and that's what I do. But like, if someone comes along with like a really great opportunity and you kind of go like, oh, I could maybe like pull in so-and-so who knows about this from such and such an office, and maybe my friend so-and-so will consult. You can do much bigger things than you think that you can, I think.
Sure. At 21 people, do you have time during the day to kind of to yourself, I suppose, to think about design and work and have kind of get into your creative mind space, or are you constantly kind of addressing, project architects, helping people move their own projects forward? What is kind of your typical day in the office at that size?
Well, I'm like a creative director. So I'm like, hey, how about this? Or like, what about, let's look at this, or like pull up, like, here's some things I think we should be looking at for, like, I kind of set the framework of what I think a project should be architecturally. And then I keep looking at it. I don't have that many direct reports, to be honest. I kind of keep, and I'm like a whale, like like the krill. I'm watching everything, and like, and what happened during the pandemic, because I come to the office, so people send everything that they're working on to the printer, and I like literally just sit at my desk and mark everything up, take a picture, and put it on Slack. Slack saved our life, by the way. And each project has a channel, so I can kind of continually talk to people about, like, if they're like, hey, what do you think about this, or is this the right direction? I'm like, well, how about this? And it just sort of is an ongoing conversation. I also talk to clients quite a lot, because a lot of my job also within the creative director thing, with a bunch of people working on a project, I try to really like take on like, what do I think that client is asking for, and what's the Venn diagram with like, what's a good design solution. And so that's my role in talking to my staff, is like, that's not what they're really looking for, though. What they really want is this. And I think architecturally we can make that good by doing this. And so I play that. It's like a role playing thing. I do that a lot, which actually really works, because I feel like that thing, as a solo practitioner, you do have to be in tune with what your clients are asking for, because that's how you keep getting referrals. And, it's not, for most people, I think starting out, I'm sure it's like, for most civilian architects are like lawyers. You're like, they want like, you're an architect? Oh yeah, this was a good one. Okay, like, it's not like, oh, I love their work. It's kind of like, they are a professional and they know what they're doing, and it takes a while to get a reputation for like design stuff.
Sure.
And that's where the press comes in. Like, it's easy to be a perfectly good architect with a good career, but you're not necessarily known for design stuff unless you make the effort to get all that press stuff. And then suddenly people are like, oh, you're a really good architect. That's only because someone wrote some magazine articles, because I think most architects are really good architects, to be honest. But there is a whole extra, it's like brand, like, how do you create your brand as an architect? Like, I hate saying that because I don't even like brand, but whatever. It's true.
Sure. When I guess as you transitioned and your office grew, have you always been someone who, is kind of setting the framework for collaborators to sort of work within, or was there a point at which you had to start kind of letting control, like giving up control of your projects as you needed more assistance to actually get them done? Was that a transition for you, or is kind of the way you are now sort of your natural demeanor from the beginning of your career?
Well, I think weirdly it is totally not unrelated. It's totally related to being a good design professor. I really run my office like a studio, and I'm the professor, and here's the problem. And on your desk, I like that. Like, you should think about this, or maybe a better reference would be this, or like, you should think about in section. Like, that's what I do, and it is perfect for a studio because, I am the boss. Like, and I do have I don't have final say like on my students' projects, or I didn't. But it's like I love doing thesis. That was my favorite thing to teach, and I do think that most projects, if they're really good, are like a good thesis project. Like the framework's good, the options are good. Like you're saying something interesting about like domestic family stuff, you're thinking about interesting materials, you're thinking about like form and some interesting, like that's the sweet spot, and it's just kind of, so I think that role is what I mean when I say creative director. It's like studio professor kind of like, and I set the framework. Like I hate going at reviews when there's just a terrible brief, and you're like, this brief sucks, because like how can anyone even like measure whether they're doing a good job within this brief, but I think office, trying to be like a design architect, you kind of need to be creating that brief for yourself in terms of like, who am I and what am I doing in 21st century design, like in this city, in this moment, cultural moment, like all that stuff. It's
sure.
If you don't have time to think about that, then it's unlikely, that you can do that part of it. But that's okay, because you don't have to do all that stuff. It's just kind of like, if you really want to do that, that's part of the gig. It's not just making stuff that looks cool. And that's where the storytelling of the press comes in too, because then the story about the project is kind of has a bigger cultural impact, I guess. I don't know.
And do you have someone in your office that manages that side of things now and is seeking and sending out everything to all the publications? Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
She's not full time. She's probably like 3 days a week. She works for other people too.
Okay.
And there's most places. There's a bunch of, and that person doesn't even have to be in like your town necessarily, right? It could be just someone who's a good rep and thinks about it, encourages you to take good pictures is really the big thing.
Who are your favorite photographers right now?
Oh, well, that's one of my side hats is I'm the head of the Julia Shulman Institute for Architectural Photography. So we give out an award every year for architectural photography. So all of them, 13 of the awardees, I guess. But like we're doing a show this year about this of this guy Lee Bay, who's this who is in Chicago and did a whole series of photographs of Chicago that are kind of like a manifesto against ruin porn, because he was sick of like all the photographs of Detroit with like decaying buildings. And he also was the architecture critic at the Chicago Sun-Times. So I like him, but I did a lot of work with Jonna Ireland, who didn't actually get that award, but she did all these photographs about Paul Williams. So I really like her. In fact, I was just thinking this morning about hiring her to do a series of portraits of some of my clients in their houses as a kind of like art project. She's maybe more of like a Kathy Opie type, like kind of an art photographer. But for a lot of like sort of fancier magazine stuff, I like Trevor Tondo, or there's this guy here named Yoshi Takamura who's really great. Laura Joualet does a lot of our stuff. Like, we credit the photographers in our projects, but I'm sure there's 7 people. It's kind of like a sensibility. Like the thing that for publications, you really have to know like what you're looking for, and you do have to style it. And like sometimes you build horrible furniture, they refuse you the landscape, and then you have to actually bring in the furniture if they'll let you. And this is a whole thing. But I have projects that I don't shoot for like 6 years because I'm waiting for them either to sell it and get good furniture and landscape, or like something happens in their life where I can go like, okay, is it okay if we take over for a week and just style it and like get it in, like getting them to want to be in a magazine or something like that? Because people are like, oh, now they got this great house, I'm just going to get everything from Pottery Barn, it'll be great. And you're like, oh my God, like, whatever. No magazines for you, or me.
One last question. If you could tell your younger self something you know now about being an architect, what would you tell your younger self?
I would, and this is something that's on my list now, is I would say like, get more comfortable with writing about architecture, because I feel like my big thing I don't have right now is the confidence in like writing a lot about what I do or what other people do. Like, I just feel like that's a really, like, in the world of where like computers can do almost everything, but they can't really communicate well or write. Like, I think that's a huge skill that like, would any of us know who Rem Koolhaas was if we hadn't written a lot of books? I don't think so. You know, like, and we don't care about Bjarke because he doesn't really write books. Like, it's, you know, it's that whole, like, it's sort of, if you want to like participate in the discourse, you actually have to write discursive things, or not discursive, just write stuff, you know? So that's on my like to-do list for the next 20 years, is like get into writing. I've been reading like Vincent Scully books lately, which are kind of great. Like, because I'm interested in like, what is American architecture like really, you know? Is it like the wooden versions of European stuff that then turns into this other thing because of, you know, how we work here, and then you got them right. Like, it's just, it's so interesting, and I don't feel like anybody writes about that much in terms of where we are now. And so it's kind of like, if I had a year off, I would muck around with that, I think. But even if I don't, I'm going to try and like, someone asked me to do like a book review. It's like, okay, I can do that, but I'm totally nervous. I can try to do it, just to kind of get that form of expression going. I think it's incredibly valuable.
That's great. Great. Well, Sean, do you have anything else?
Well, I just wanted to see, I wanted to open up the floor, if you don't mind, Barbara, just to see if any of our audience members have any questions for you directly. So please, this is informal. Feel free to speak up if anyone would like to ask a question. Everyone's going to be shy. Okay, I guess so.
I would just say thanks a lot for all your, advice and your knowledge drop on us, because I'm just sort of soaking it all up, and I appreciate Scott and Sean so much as well, and just thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you, Blair.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Well, all right, with that, Barbara, thank you again so much. This has been incredible. So nice to meet you virtually, and we'll keep following your work, and look forward to maybe talking with you again sometime in the future, or when you're in Austin.
To come to Austin to visit all the LA immigrants.
Yeah, exactly.
The non-immigrants. Yeah, that'll be fun.
Sure. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great afternoon and great rest of the week.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Candace. Okay.
Thanks, Barbara.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.